Over time, many of us come to realize that financial outcomes are rarely the result of isolated decisions. They emerge instead from patterns of behavior that unfold quietly, often unnoticed, across years. Money does not respond to intention alone, nor does it bend easily to sudden resolve. It follows rules shaped by consistency, restraint, and the cumulative weight of repeated choices. When examined closely, financial success appears less dramatic than commonly imagined and more procedural than emotional. It is shaped not by moments of brilliance, but by the ordinary decisions we make when no one is watching. We often attribute financial stability or instability to external conditions, to opportunity, or to timing. While these factors do influence outcomes, they rarely explain the full picture. What persists beneath them is behavior. How we respond to surplus and scarcity, how we interpret comfort, and how we manage uncertainty. Over time, these responses form habits, and habits, once established, exert a quiet authority over our financial lives. They guide our actions without requiring constant deliberation, which is why they are so powerful and, at times, so difficult to change. Financial discipline is frequently misunderstood as a form of restriction imposed from the outside. In reality, it is an internal alignment between intention and behavior. It does not rely on constant vigilance or force. Rather, it develops gradually as certain choices become habitual and others lose their appeal. This process is subtle. It rarely announces itself. Yet, over extended periods, it produces outcomes that appear, from the outside, to be deliberate and controlled. Many of us live in environments that encourage immediate consumption and quick resolution. The language of urgency surrounds financial decisions, often framing spending as a response to fleeting conditions or emotional states. In such settings, the ability to pause becomes a defining trait. Pausing allows us to separate impulse from intention, to observe our motivations before acting on them. This separation is not dramatic, but it is consequential. It introduces time into the decision-making process, and time, when allowed to operate, tends to clarify priorities. When we examine our financial behavior honestly, patterns begin to emerge. Certain decisions repeat themselves under similar conditions. We may spend more freely when fatigued, or defer planning when outcomes feel distant. These patterns are rarely random. They reflect underlying beliefs about money, security, and control. Over time, these beliefs become embedded in our routines, shaping not only what we do, but how we perceive our options. Recognizing this relationship between belief and behavior is a necessary step toward change. Change, in this context, is not abrupt. It unfolds incrementally, through small adjustments sustained over long periods. Financial habits do not respond well to intensity. They respond to consistency. A single restrained decision has little impact on its own, just as a single impulsive one rarely determines an outcome. What matters is the direction established by repeated choices. Over time, these choices compound, producing effects that are disproportionate to their apparent significance. Prosperity, when viewed through this lens, becomes less about accumulation and more about alignment. It reflects a coherence between how resources are acquired, managed, and preserved. This coherence does not require exceptional circumstances. It requires clarity, patience, and a willingness to prioritize long-term stability over short-term satisfaction. Such prioritization is rarely comfortable, but it is rarely dramatic either. It operates quietly, through routines that, once established, feel unremarkable. Many of us underestimate the influence of environment on financial behavior. The cues we encounter daily shape our decisions in subtle ways. Availability, visibility, and social norms all exert pressure, often encouraging spending without reflection. Developing financial discipline, therefore, involves not only internal resolve but also an awareness of these external influences. By recognizing them, we reduce their power. We become less reactive and more deliberate, allowing intention to guide behavior rather than circumstance. Over time, restraint becomes less about denial and more about preference. Choices that once felt restrictive begin to feel appropriate. This shift does not occur through effort alone. It arises from repeated exposure to the consequences of different behaviors. When patience yields stability, and impulsivity yields volatility, The contrast becomes instructive. Gradually, the mind recalibrates, associating restraint with security rather than deprivation. The concept of delayed gratification is often discussed in abstract terms, but its practical significance lies in everyday decisions. Each instance in which immediate desire is deferred reinforces a pattern of control. These instances accumulate, shaping expectations and reducing sensitivity to short-term fluctuations. Over time, this pattern fosters a sense of agency. Financial decisions feel less reactive and more intentional, grounded in an understanding of their long-term implications. Planning plays a central role in this process, not as a rigid blueprint but as a framework for consistency. Effective planning does not attempt to predict every outcome. Instead, it establishes boundaries within which decisions are made. These boundaries simplify choices, reducing the cognitive load associated with financial management. By narrowing options, planning preserves attention and minimizes impulsive behavior, allowing discipline to operate with less effort. Patience, in financial matters, is often mistaken for passivity. In reality, it is an active stance, requiring ongoing restraint and awareness. It involves maintaining course in the absence of immediate reinforcement. This is particularly challenging in environments that reward visibility and speed. Yet, patience remains one of the most reliable predictors of long-term prosperity. It allows time to perform its essential function, smoothing volatility and amplifying the effects of consistent behavior. As habits solidify, financial management becomes less emotionally charged. Decisions are guided by established criteria rather than transient states. This emotional neutrality is significant. It reduces the likelihood of extreme responses to temporary conditions, whether favorable or adverse. Over time, this stability fosters resilience, enabling individuals to navigate uncertainty without abandoning their underlying principles. Personal responsibility, in this context, is not about blame. It is about ownership. It involves recognizing the degree to which outcomes are influenced by our choices, even when external factors are present. This recognition is empowering. It shifts focus from circumstances to behavior, from reaction to preparation. By accepting responsibility for patterns rather than events, we gain leverage over our financial trajectory. Many of us resist this perspective because it requires sustained attention and humility. It asks us to examine our behavior without rationalization and to accept gradual progress in place of immediate results. Yet, this approach aligns with the reality of financial systems, which respond predictably to consistency and poorly to volatility. Over time, those who embrace this alignment tend to experience outcomes that reflect their restraint. Impulse, by contrast, operates on a shorter horizon. It prioritizes immediacy and emotional relief, often at the expense of long-term stability. While impulsive decisions can feel inconsequential in isolation, their cumulative effect is significant. They introduce variability and erode predictability, making planning more difficult and outcomes less stable. Recognizing impulse as a pattern rather than a flaw allows us to address it systematically, through structure rather than willpower. Structure is often misunderstood as rigidity. In practice, it provides flexibility by reducing uncertainty. When financial decisions are guided by established parameters, fewer choices require deliberation. This efficiency preserves cognitive resources and reduces the likelihood of error. Over time, structure becomes self-reinforcing, as the benefits of predictability become evident. Consistency remains the central theme in long-term prosperity. It bridges the gap between intention and outcome, translating abstract goals into tangible results. Consistency does not demand perfection. It tolerates deviation while maintaining direction. This tolerance is essential, as it prevents temporary lapses from undermining overall progress. By focusing on trajectory rather than individual decisions, consistency accommodates human variability without sacrificing discipline. As time passes, the effects of consistent behavior become more pronounced. Small advantages accumulate, while small disadvantages compound. This asymmetry explains why financial outcomes often diverge significantly over long periods, even among individuals with similar starting points. The divergence is rarely dramatic in its early stages. It becomes visible only after extended intervals, reinforcing the importance of patience and foresight. Prosperity, understood as a process, resists simplification. It cannot be reduced to a single habit or decision. It emerges from the interaction of many behaviors, each modest in isolation. This perspective challenges narratives that emphasize sudden change or exceptional events. Instead, it highlights the power of ordinary actions sustained over time. In adopting this view, we begin to see financial management as an extension of daily life rather than a separate domain. Decisions about time, attention, and energy intersect with financial choices, reinforcing or undermining stability. By aligning these domains, we create coherence, reducing friction and enhancing effectiveness. Ultimately, rewiring the brain for financial success is less about transformation than about refinement. It involves adjusting responses, recalibrating expectations, and reinforcing behaviors that align with long-term well-being. This process is gradual and often imperceptible in its early stages. Yet, over time, it produces a form of prosperity characterized not by excess, but by stability, clarity, and confidence. Such prosperity does not eliminate uncertainty, nor does it guarantee favorable outcomes in every circumstance. It does, however, provide a framework for navigating complexity with composure. By emphasizing discipline, responsibility, and patience, it aligns behavior with the realities of time and compounding. In doing so, it offers a durable path toward financial stability, grounded not in aspiration, but in sustained, deliberate action. As we continue to observe the relationship between behavior and financial outcomes, it becomes increasingly evident that the mind adapts to whatever patterns it rehearses most frequently. Financial behavior is not governed solely by knowledge or awareness, but by familiarity. What feels normal tends to feel acceptable, and what feels acceptable tends to be repeated. Over time, repetition reshapes perception, and perception, in turn, influences judgment. This feedback loop operates quietly, often beyond conscious attention, yet it is central to understanding why certain financial habits persist despite their long-term consequences. Many of us assume that better decisions naturally follow better information. While information is necessary, it is rarely sufficient. The presence of knowledge does not guarantee its application. We often know what would be prudent, yet act otherwise, particularly under pressure or distraction. This gap between knowing and doing is not a failure of intelligence but a reflection of conditioning. The brain prioritizes familiarity and immediacy, especially in environments saturated with stimuli. Financial discipline, therefore, requires more than awareness. It requires a restructuring of what feels automatic. Automatic behavior plays a decisive role in long-term prosperity. Decisions made without deliberation account for a substantial portion of daily financial activity. These decisions are guided by defaults, routines, and emotional associations rather than explicit reasoning. Over time, they exert a greater influence on outcomes than occasional, carefully considered choices. Recognizing this shifts our focus away from isolated decisions and toward the systems that produce them. Systems, in this sense, are not formal constructs but patterns of behavior reinforced by context. They include how we respond to surplus, how we manage inconvenience, and how we interpret comfort. When surplus appears, do we treat it as temporary or enduring? When inconvenience arises, do we resolve it through spending or adjustment? These responses, repeated over time, define the character of our financial lives. They shape not only what we accumulate, but how we relate to resources more broadly. Restraint emerges within these systems not as an act of denial, but as a preference cultivated through experience. When restraint consistently yields stability, it begins to feel less like sacrifice and more like alignment. This shift is subtle. It does not occur through force or self-reproach, but through exposure to outcomes. Over time, the brain associates certain behaviors with predictability and others with volatility. These associations guide future decisions, often without conscious intervention. The role of emotion in financial behavior cannot be ignored, yet it is often misunderstood. Emotions do not simply disrupt rationality, they inform it. They signal perceived threats and opportunities, shaping attention and urgency. In financial contexts, however, emotional responses are frequently misaligned with long-term interests. Immediate discomfort can feel more pressing than distant risk, leading to decisions that prioritize short-term relief over enduring stability. Recognizing this tendency allows for a more measured response. Measured responses rely on distance. Distance introduces perspective, reducing the intensity of immediate impulses. This distance can be temporal, created by delaying action, or cognitive, created by reframing the situation. Over time, practices that introduce distance become habitual, weakening the grip of impulse. Decisions begin to reflect intention rather than reaction, and emotional fluctuations lose their authority over behavior. Consistency reinforces this process by reducing the frequency with which decisions must be actively managed. When certain responses become routine, they no longer require justification. This reduces cognitive fatigue and minimizes the opportunity for impulsive deviation. Over extended periods, consistency produces a form of stability that is resilient to change. It does not depend on mood or circumstance, but on established patterns that persist regardless of context. Planning contributes to this stability by providing a reference point against which decisions can be evaluated. Effective planning is not prescriptive. It is orienting. It clarifies priorities without dictating outcomes. By establishing a general direction, planning allows for flexibility while preserving coherence. Decisions made within this framework are less likely to be swayed by transient considerations, as their relevance is assessed in relation to longer-term objectives. Time plays a dual role in financial behavior. It can either amplify errors or magnify discipline. Short-term decisions, when repeated, accumulate into long-term consequences. This accumulation is often underestimated because its effects are delayed and diffuse. Yet, over time it becomes decisive. Small deviations, sustained over years, can produce outcomes that appear disproportionate to their origin. Understanding this dynamic encourages caution, not through fear, but through awareness. Delayed gratification operates within this temporal framework. It aligns present behavior with future outcomes, acknowledging that immediate satisfaction often carries deferred costs. Practicing delayed gratification is not about suppressing desire, but about sequencing it. It involves recognizing that certain satisfactions are more sustainable when deferred, and that restraint can preserve options rather than eliminate them. Over time, this recognition becomes intuitive, guiding behavior with minimal effort. The distinction between impulse and intention becomes clearer as these patterns solidify. Impulse responds to immediate cues, while intention reflects considered priorities. When intention consistently governs behavior, financial decisions become less reactive and more coherent. This coherence reduces internal conflict, as actions align more closely with values. Over time, this alignment fosters confidence, not derived from certainty, but from consistency. Personal responsibility, in this context, involves acknowledging the role of choice without overstating control. It recognizes that while external conditions influence outcomes, behavior determines how those conditions are navigated. This perspective avoids both fatalism and overconfidence. It accepts uncertainty while emphasizing preparation. By focusing on controllable factors, it directs attention toward habits that endure regardless of circumstance. Responsibility also entails accepting the gradual nature of progress. Financial stability rarely arrives abruptly. It is assembled incrementally, through decisions that may seem inconsequential at the time. This gradualism can be discouraging in environments that celebrate rapid change. Yet, it reflects the reality of how financial systems operate. Compounding rewards patience, not urgency. Impulse-driven behavior, by contrast, introduces noise into the system. It increases variability and undermines predictability. While variability can be stimulating, it complicates planning and increases exposure to risk. Over time, excessive variability erodes stability, making outcomes more dependent on circumstance than behavior. Recognizing this encourages moderation, not as an ideal, but as a practical necessity. Structure mitigates variability by establishing constraints that guide behavior. These constraints are not punitive, they are protective. They limit exposure to impulse and reduce the cognitive burden associated with constant decision-making. Over time, structure becomes a source of freedom, as it preserves resources and reduces the likelihood of error. This inversion of perception is central to sustainable discipline. As discipline becomes embedded, financial management shifts from an active endeavor to a background process. Decisions are made efficiently, with minimal emotional engagement. This efficiency is not mechanical. It is adaptive. It reflects a system calibrated to balance present needs with future considerations. Over time, such systems require less maintenance, as their benefits reinforce their continuation. Prosperity, viewed through this lens, is not defined by accumulation alone. It includes predictability, resilience, and the capacity to absorb disruption without destabilization. These qualities emerge from disciplined behavior sustained over time. They cannot be engineered quickly, nor can they be imposed externally. They develop through repeated alignment between intention and action. Many of us underestimate the extent to which habits shape identity. Financial habits influence not only outcomes but self-perception. They inform how we view our competence, our agency, and our relationship with uncertainty. When habits support stability, they reinforce a sense of control. When they undermine it, they erode confidence. Over time, this feedback affects decision-making, creating either a virtuous or a destabilizing cycle. Breaking destabilizing cycles requires patience and realism. It involves adjusting systems rather than relying on resolve. Small changes, applied consistently, can redirect trajectories without provoking resistance. This approach respects the brain's preference for familiarity while gradually introducing new patterns. Over time, these patterns become the new default, reducing reliance on conscious effort. The role of attention in financial behavior is often overlooked. Attention is finite, and how it is allocated influences decisions. Environments that fragment attention increase susceptibility to impulse, as they reduce the capacity for reflection. Protecting attention, therefore, becomes an indirect form of financial discipline. It allows for deliberation and reinforces intention, supporting more coherent behavior over time. As attention stabilizes, so does judgment. Decisions are evaluated in context rather than isolation. Short-term trade-offs are considered alongside long-term implications, reducing the likelihood of regret. This integrated perspective is not innate. It is cultivated through experience and reflection. Over time, it becomes habitual, guiding behavior with minimal conscious intervention. The cumulative effect of these processes is a form of prosperity characterized by durability rather than intensity. It does not rely on exceptional events or favorable timing. It emerges from systems designed to operate effectively under ordinary conditions. This durability is its defining strength, enabling stability across varied circumstances. Understanding prosperity as a process reshapes expectations. It discourages reliance on sudden change and encourages sustained engagement. It frames financial success not as a destination, but as an ongoing alignment between behavior and time. This framing supports patience, reduces frustration, and fosters resilience. As patterns solidify, the distinction between effort and ease becomes less pronounced. Disciplined behavior requires less conscious exertion, as it aligns with established routines. This alignment reduces friction, making stability feel natural rather than forced. Over time, this ease reinforces discipline, creating a self-sustaining system. In this way, financial success becomes less about control and more about design. It reflects the intentional structuring of behavior to produce predictable outcomes. This design operates quietly, through habits that guide decisions without constant oversight. Over extended periods, it yields prosperity defined not by excess, but by coherence, resilience, and sustained capacity. As the process continues to unfold, it becomes apparent that long-term financial prosperity is sustained less by vigilance than by integration. When disciplined behavior is fully integrated into daily life, it ceases to feel like a separate effort. It becomes part of how decisions are made, how trade-offs are evaluated, and how uncertainty is tolerated. This integration is gradual. It reflects not a change in circumstances, but a change in orientation, where financial considerations are neither avoided nor dramatized, but calmly incorporated into broader patterns of living. Over time, many of us discover that financial stress is rarely caused by a lack of resources alone. More often, it arises from inconsistency, unpredictability, and misalignment between expectations and reality. When behavior fluctuates, outcomes become difficult to anticipate, and this uncertainty breeds tension. By contrast, when behavior is stable, outcomes tend to stabilize as well. Even when resources are limited, predictability provides a measure of control. This control, though modest, reduces anxiety and supports clearer judgment. Judgment improves as emotional volatility diminishes. When decisions are no longer driven by urgency or avoidance, they can be evaluated more objectively. This objectivity does not eliminate emotion, but it places emotion in context. Financial decisions are then informed by an understanding of consequences rather than dominated by immediate sensation. Over time, this shift alters not only behavior but perception, recalibrating what feels necessary and what feels optional. The ability to tolerate delay plays a significant role in this recalibration. Delay introduces space between desire and action, allowing priorities to assert themselves. In this space, the appeal of immediate gratification often weakens, revealing its transient nature. As this pattern repeats, the mind learns to associate delay with clarity rather than deprivation. This association strengthens restraint, making it less dependent on conscious effort. Patience, in this sense, becomes a practiced capacity rather than an abstract virtue. It is reinforced through repeated exposure to deferred outcomes that ultimately prove beneficial. Each instance in which waiting produces stability contributes to a growing confidence in the process. This confidence reduces the temptation to intervene prematurely, allowing long-term strategies to unfold without disruption. The quiet nature of this process can make it difficult to recognize progress. Unlike dramatic changes, gradual improvements often go unnoticed until they accumulate into meaningful differences. This delayed visibility requires trust in the underlying system. It asks us to evaluate progress not through immediate feedback, but through sustained observation. Over time, those who maintain this perspective tend to experience fewer reversals and greater continuity. Continuity supports resilience. When financial behavior is consistent, disruptions are absorbed more easily. Temporary setbacks do not necessitate wholesale change, as they are interpreted within a broader context. This perspective prevents overcorrection, which often introduces new instability. Instead, adjustments are measured and proportional, preserving the integrity of the system. The distinction between adjustment and reaction is critical. Reaction is immediate and emotionally charged, while adjustment is deliberate and informed by pattern recognition. Financial systems governed by adjustment are more adaptable, as they respond to change without abandoning structure. This adaptability is essential for long-term prosperity, which must accommodate variability without becoming volatile. As systems mature, they require less conscious management. This reduction in effort is not a sign of neglect, but of alignment. When behavior and intention are aligned, fewer decisions demand attention. This efficiency preserves cognitive resources, allowing focus to shift toward other domains of life. Financial stability, in this way, supports overall well-being by reducing mental load. The role of habits in this transition cannot be overstated. Habits transform deliberate actions into automatic responses. When these responses are aligned with long-term interests, they protect against impulsive deviation. Over time, habits shape identity, influencing how we see ourselves in relation to money. This identity, once established, reinforces behavior, creating a stable feedback loop. Identity-based behavior is particularly durable. When restraint and consistency are perceived as expressions of who we are rather than what we do, they are less susceptible to disruption. This perception emerges gradually, through repeated confirmation that disciplined behavior produces desirable outcomes. As confidence in this relationship grows, adherence becomes less conditional and more inherent. This inherent quality distinguishes sustainable prosperity from temporary success. Temporary success often depends on favorable conditions or exceptional effort. Sustainable prosperity depends on systems that function reliably under ordinary circumstances. These systems do not eliminate risk, but they manage it through diversification of behavior and moderation of exposure. Over time, they produce outcomes that are robust rather than spectacular. Spectacular outcomes, while appealing, often obscure the processes that sustain them. They draw attention to peaks rather than trajectories, encouraging imitation without understanding. By contrast, a focus on process emphasizes repeatability and control. It acknowledges that most financial progress occurs incrementally, through decisions that attract little attention at the time they are made. The relationship between time and behavior becomes increasingly salient in this context. Time amplifies whatever patterns are in place. Consistent discipline compounds into stability, while consistent neglect compounds into fragility. This amplification is impartial. It rewards alignment and exposes inconsistency. Understanding this dynamic encourages humility, as it underscores the limits of short-term intervention. Humility supports learning. When we accept that outcomes reflect patterns rather than isolated events, we become more attentive to behavior. This attentiveness fosters incremental improvement, as small adjustments are made in response to observed effects. Over time, these adjustments refine the system, enhancing its efficiency and resilience. Refinement is an ongoing process. It does not seek perfection, but coherence. Coherence ensures that decisions across different contexts reinforce rather than contradict one another. This reinforcement reduces friction and increases predictability. As coherence strengthens, financial behavior becomes more intuitive, guided by internalized principles rather than external prompts. Principles, unlike rules, adapt to context. They provide orientation without rigidity, allowing behavior to remain consistent while accommodating change. Financial principles grounded in restraint, patience, and responsibility offer such flexibility. They guide decisions across varying circumstances, preserving alignment even as conditions evolve. Responsibility, in this mature sense, is forward-looking. It emphasizes preparation over reaction and continuity over correction. It recognizes that while uncertainty cannot be eliminated, its impact can be mitigated through consistent behavior. This recognition fosters a proactive stance, characterized by anticipation rather than avoidance. Anticipation does not require prediction. It involves acknowledging the inevitability of change and designing systems that can absorb it. Financial systems built on this understanding prioritize margin and flexibility. They avoid operating at extremes, recognizing that extremes increase vulnerability. Over time, this moderation supports durability. Durability is a defining feature of long-term prosperity. It reflects the capacity to endure without degradation. Financial durability emerges from habits that preserve resources, manage risk, and maintain optionality. These habits are cultivated through experience and reflection, not imposed through urgency. As durability increases, so does confidence. This confidence is not based on certainty, but on familiarity with the process. It arises from repeated confirmation that disciplined behavior produces stable outcomes. Over time, this confidence reduces the emotional charge associated with financial decisions, supporting clearer judgment. Clear judgment reinforces discipline, completing the cycle. When decisions are made calmly and consistently, outcomes align more closely with intention. This alignment reinforces trust in the system, reducing the temptation to deviate. Over extended periods, this cycle sustains prosperity without requiring constant intervention. Prosperity, thus understood, is neither elusive nor guaranteed. It is contingent on behavior sustained over time. It does not promise immunity from difficulty, but it offers resilience in the face of it. This resilience is its most valuable attribute, enabling continuity amid change. Many of us come to appreciate this perspective only gradually. It contrasts with narratives that emphasize immediacy and transformation. Yet, it aligns more closely with lived experience, where progress is often uneven and cumulative. By accepting this reality, we reduce frustration and enhance persistence. Persistence, supported by patience and structure, remains the quiet force behind long-term success. It does not seek recognition, nor does it rely on momentum. It operates steadily, guided by principles that endure beyond circumstance. Over time, persistence transforms intention into outcome. In the end, rewiring the brain for financial success is not about imposing discipline, but about cultivating environments and habits that make disciplined behavior the path of least resistance. It involves aligning behavior with the realities of time, uncertainty, and compounding. This alignment, once established, sustains itself through feedback and reinforcement. The result is a form of prosperity that is understated yet substantial. It is characterized by stability rather than excess, by confidence rather than display. It reflects a mature relationship with resources, grounded in responsibility and restraint. Such prosperity does not demand attention, but it endures, providing a foundation upon which other aspects of life can develop with greater clarity and assurance.